We'd love to see where you're calling in from. Thank you. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Nancy. Welcome, everybody, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whichever part of this beautiful world you are in. Today's session is a second conversation for us on sustainable finance. And this session is looking at sustainable finance as the channel for sustainable development. This event is hosted, as you can see by the logos behind me, through the partnership with African Venture Philanthropy Alliance, the United States African Development Foundation, and in partnership with Responsible Business Consulting. My name is Susan Njoroge. I'm the CEO of Responsible Business Consulting, and it is my pleasure and honor to be your moderator and guide for this event. As Nancy said, we have participants from all over the globe. So hello from Vienna, Austria. Hi, John. Hello to our friends in Singapore, in Zambia, in Botswana, in Zimbabwe, in Nigeria, in Cape Town, of course, in Nairobi. It's really great that you could be here with us. As I mentioned, this session and our dialogues that we've been having around sustainable finance. And this particular one wants to dive deeper into how sustainable finance needs to be the way that we finance for Africa's future. Because if you look across our continent, our Africa continent, it's so clear to all of us, whichever country that you're in, that to achieve the sustainable and prosperous development that we need for our people, for our societies, for our economies, there's got to be a lot more robust input and action from the private sector. So this dialogue session and this particular session that we're having today, we'll look at how we can really present the urgency and the opportunities around sustainable financing, because that's the only way that we can ensure that development happens in a way that ensures that we're supporting the prosperity of people and of planet. We have a very distinguished panel of speakers and guests that you'll be hearing from today, so please be sure to stay with us and be sure to share your questions, your comments with us throughout this session on the chat function. We'll be regularly checking it, and I'll be checking it myself to see what conversations I can draw from what you're sharing with us into our discussions. A couple of highlighting pointers for you before we begin. We are recording this session, so you would have seen on your screen, so please be aware that this is a recorded session. And as you joined, everyone was automatically muted on video and audio. We'd ask you to please ensure that if you are going to have your videos on, that you don't give any distractions to the session. Please ensure for sure that your audio is off so that we don't have any background noise that can interrupt the session. At some point in the program, we'll also run a poll survey where we'd really love to get your feedback because your feedback is really helpful to the organizations and partners in helping shape the next steps that they need to take around sustainable finance. Okay, so to kick us off, I am delighted to invite the CEO of AVPA, Frank Aswani, to give us his opening remarks. Frank, please go ahead.
Susan, thank you so much. And to all the attendees and our panelists, we're really grateful that you could make time to join us today. I know the year is coming to an end. People are probably zoomed out or Zoom fatigued at this point in time. But we're really grateful that you could join us for this very important conversation as we try and see how we can address the ever-growing challenge of how do we move and fund Africa's progress and help us meet our 2030 SDG goals. To that context, we know the challenges we're facing. We have some substantial hurdles to overcome, but the good thing about the challenges we're facing, there are great opportunities for impact, And this community in particular is one that's attracted to some of these challenges. So I'm really grateful that you are here to help us listen, share, and hopefully collaborate beyond this program to see how we can better serve the needs of the continent. AVPA is very deliberately trying to see how we can try to address some of these market gaps and market challenges. And this is part of a process that we are trying to help grow the effectiveness of the impact ecosystem in Africa, in line with our mission of mobilizing additional capital towards impact on the continent and ensuring that the capital is deployed for maximum impact. We have started off a couple of thoughts process around how we can support the growth of the ecosystem. You may know, some of you, that we're running we're looking to run a number of capacity building programs. We're so excited to be running one at the moment, which is an impact investing fellowship program with our Asian sister network and faculty from the Oxford Side Business School. We hope that this particular series that you're on now will lead to us identifying some programmatic interventions that we can provide to the market space. We're talking to African governments around seeing how we can support the upskilling in innovative finance. Basically, how can we make sure that the whole continent of Africa and the key players are becoming increasingly and as fast as possible capable in this innovative financing space. So AVPA is an investor-only network, and our mission, as I mentioned, is to bring together investors providing grants, debt, and equity to increase collaboration towards increasing the flow of capital towards impact. We are headquartered in Nairobi with offices in Johannesburg and in Lagos. We are also part of an international network of sister organizations that brings together networks in Asia, Latin America, and Europe. And this network, global network, is particularly focused on supporting the Global South movement, where we know the largest and most exciting impact opportunities lie, and especially in Africa. So we're super excited about the session today. We hope that this leads to greater things to emerge. We are keen to partner with you. Let us know if there's anything we can do better, if there's anything we can support you with. And I'm super excited about what we're about to go through in the next hour and a bit. Susan, over to you. And thank you everyone for making time to join us.
Thank you, Frank. And yeah, thank you so much for having this session together and bringing everyone together here under the umbrella of AVPA and your partners. This is, like I mentioned at the beginning, this is the second of a dialogue series, so there will be a third one to follow. And we had our first one in August, which was around sustainable finance and the future that we want for our present and future generations. Following Frank's conversation and his insights that he shared with us, we're now going to invite our guest keynote address, and our speaker is Ruben Wamboi, the Africa Regional Coordinator of UNEP's Finance Initiative. Ruben is an economist working on sustainability and climate risk in the finance industry, and his work at UNEP FI covers sustainable finance across sub-Saharan Africa. Now, all of you hopefully are aware of the really critical meeting that's actually taking place this week in Glasgow, which is the COP26, where world leaders are coming together, and we really, really hope to unite and take concrete action to tackle climate change. Climate change is an existential crisis for all of us, and finance will have an extremely critical role to play in ensuring how we're able to solve for this. So Ruben, I welcome you, and we look forward to hearing your remarks on climate finance and UNEP's finance initiative. Karibu.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susan. And thanks to AVPA, the team, for inviting me today so that we can have this conversation, which is very critical. As Susan mentioned, we know COP26 is happening. And coincidentally, you know, today is a super day because today is the finance day at COP26. So we're going to have a lot of discussions and finance commitments coming from the finance sector in regard to financing climate action. and around the just transition agenda and net zero alignment for the finance industry. Before I go into my presentation, just to mention what Finance Initiative is about. So UNEP Finance Initiative is a partnership between the UNEP and the finance sector. So we are, it's a UN-led and private sector convened initiative. And we are the custodians of the global frameworks on sustainable finance, at least on the banking side, where we have the principles for responsible banking, and on the insurance side, where we have the principles for sustainable insurance. And on the investment side, the principles of responsible investment, which most people in the finance space are more familiar with the PRI. And more recently, you may have heard, some of you, we have some net zero alliances that have come across in the finance sector. So like we have a net zero banking alliance, the same for insurance, a net zero insurance alliance. And for investors, we have a net zero asset owners alliance. And this is basically financial institutions that have committed to hit net zero targets. Some as early as 2030, some 2035, some 2045, most being 2040 and others 2050. So that's just an overview. I think I'll just go directly into the presentation. And I think one good way to just show what the urgency of ESG and sustainable finance in Africa's prosperity looks like is to actually highlight, what is the current landscape. So the first thing we are saying today is that ESG factors are very core to Africa's sustainable development agenda. And, just to give, some headline statistics, we've heard often that Africa contributes to 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. There's a report that has just been released called Green Africa, which has actually updated that to around 10% if you actually add land use emissions and energy emissions, and you just do the value addition split. And as we know, Africa is one of the regions that is actually probably hardest hit by the physical effects of climate change. And what compounds this problem is that we have so many highly commodity dependent nations in Africa. And beyond the environmental aspect, if you look at the S and the G, which are often forgotten in the ESG discussion, social issues like human rights and labor market social protection actually becoming more mainstream in the finance space. And this has actually been aggravated by the effects of COVID. And of course, with the SDGs and the country nationally determined contributions, then that is increasingly shaping, public and private perception on achieving sustainability. And as we all know right now, we have a very huge funding gap of SDGs in Africa. And with the commitment that has been made to developing countries of $100 billion per year, we are way far from that. So I just thought maybe I should start by just giving what this overview looks like. And if you look on my right, I have actually provided a feedback mechanism just to show how the effects of what's happening in the environment actually feed, they have the feedback mechanism into the SDGs and how they affect, at least negatively, the achievement of key SDGs like food security, poverty reduction, water, health, and all that. And of course, to the bottom, we see which are the biggest hazards in Africa, being flood and droughts, which is, most countries are affected that way. And I'll be happy to share these slides after the presentation. But I just thought to just spend some considerable time just, putting together this landscape of what the environment looks like. If we move to the next slide, what we are simply saying is that, again, on the funding front, most of you in this space, you will know we have a very huge investment shortfall. The image you actually see, there's a report that was released last week by the Global Center on Adaptation, who we are working very closely with, and the Africa Development Bank, just to show what has been the amount of tracked climate adaptation finance in Africa. And that is just over $6 billion, with 90% of it being grants and concessional debt, and a lot of it coming from DFIs. and bilateral flows 19%, which this is telling you that, even the climate adaptation need that is actually in Africa, a very little, minimal, probably insignificant chunk is being financed locally. And yet we still have a very huge gap. The likes of the IMF and the FDB have told us what the funding gap looks like, and you'll have it on your screen. But something just to highlight here is two things. One is to say, by region, East Africa is the biggest recipient of these funds, and agriculture is the biggest by sector, but still agriculture is underly funded. But secondly is to say there's no correlation between vulnerability and where the adaptation finance is flowing. So which probably means there's also misalignment and mismatch. So it's, the adaptation finance is not necessarily flowing to the most vulnerable countries. So that means there is a very huge underfunding gap in Africa's climate adaptation space. If we move to the next slide, what we are saying here is, just to try and capture, what the barriers look like. I think we have like three key categories of barrier. Of course, one is the, policy and regulatory front. A lot of complaints I hear in this when I talk to banks. We have at least 14 banks in sub-Saharan Africa and 5 in North Africa that are within my portfolio at UNEP-FI for the Africa region. They say there's lack of proper private sector incentives on the regulatory front to actually, develop sustainable products. But two is market barriers. Of course, one I hear a lot is, there's a perceived that the risk-adjusted returns, if you actually go into the green or sustainable space, there isn't really a premium. And of course, this is questionable. There are a lot of differing studies on actually whether, green or sustainable investments actually outperform brown investments. And then we have the complexity of projects due diligence. It's becoming really hard to actually, do due diligence on, capital intensive sustainable projects. Think of green manufacturing or sustainable infra. And then, of course, we have other market barriers there, about data, about commercial viability, and about technical capabilities, and also metrics and standards for assessment. And the last barrier we see is about implementation and coordination, because there's a lot of working together with government or subnational governments and a lot of stakeholders involved, and sometimes the coordination is really hard. If we move to the next slide, what we are then saying, given that these are the barriers to it, we have different financial actors, but the key message in this slide, what we have actually done with GCA is that on one front, we show like who are the commercial finance providers in the market, from the commercial banks and the PEs and the VCs, all the way to like highly consensual providers like non-for-profits and foreign government agencies. And what we realize is that for each of the players in the market, they actually have a niche in terms of accelerating sustainable finance. So I've just highlighted a box around PE and VCs and say, for example, for PEs and VCs, two things they can actually do is actually unlock high potential businesses, which are still small at scale. And also, given the niche of their work, PEs and VCs can actually fund nascent technology within the climate space or the sustainability space. And so this slide actually means if every actor is uniquely positioned, given their business model, to do something around sustainability. And happy to go through this later once you receive the document, just to see what each of the actors can do. If we go to in the next slide, which is actually my last slide, you say, what would be the recommendation for increasing sustainable finance in Africa? I see the opportunity around 4 things. One is, of course, targeted funding. So, think about green or environmental funds. Think of, sustainability products like green bonds, blue bonds within that space. Then, of course, 2 is to improve the policy and regulatory environment. This could be through de-risking, like think of credit guarantees or credit enhancement. And then, of course, co-investment in the private sector. Then the third incentive for Africa's market will be investment stimulus. So whether it's market design, just for price visibility, or discoverability. You know, when you just think of, you know, how do you actually convince private sector players to actually put in their money here? And also things like carbon taxes, and renewable subsidies. And of course, our last, you know, system issue will be greening the financial system and net zero finance. And what this looks like is, you know, having very clear, you know, sustainability roadmaps and being able to be part of industry initiatives like Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance. So I'll just end there and say, you know, this is what the landscape of sustainable finance and ESG criteria looks like for the African market. So thank you, Susan.
Ruben, thank you so much. I'll ask you to come back onto screen. Great, there you are, the slides were just coming off screen. I think what you shared was very insightful. One, that majority of the money that we need to deal with our climate adaptation issues in Africa are coming from abroad rather than from ourselves. So we're waiting for someone else to fix our problems for us or give us the money to do that. And then the other, I think, important thing that for me struck me is that you said for each of the financial players that exist, there is a niche, there is a space, there is an opportunity for them to actually do something around sustainable finance and climate financing. So it's not like it's a small market, you know, the way people can perceive just because it's potentially one problem, but it's a big problem that touches on many things. There is room for everyone in the financial sector space to do their part to move this forward. The opportunities are there. It's just that they're not being grasped perhaps as quickly or as readily or understood as well as they could be. So thank you very much for that insight. I'd like you to stay with us on screen because in a short while, we'll have a quick conversation together. And before we have the conversation around sustainable finance, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is Rebecca Minsey. And Rebecca is the Investment Director at Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund. Over the past 7 years, Rebecca has driven direct investment into the agribusiness sector in East Africa and been able to reach over 7 million smallholder farmers. Rebecca, it's great that you can join us. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to you because I think maybe before we begin the conversation, you could tell us a little bit about the Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund. My colleague Abu is going to bring up the slides for you, so you can just let him know when you want to move to the next slide. Please feel free to unmute and just tell us a bit more. Thanks.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rebecca. I'm thrilled to be able to join you for this conversation. I think Ruben has really nicely laid out the landscape, and I hope that when I talk about the Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund, you'll actually have a use case in mind. We are one of several avenues that are available for sustainability and climate investing. And so I want to kind of just open the book a little bit about us. And tell you how we are tackling it in real time. So next slide, please, Abu. In short, we are a $58 million venture capital fund. And what we do is that we invest in fast-growing agribusinesses that help smallholder farmers adapt to climate change. Again, the word adaptation is quite key here. A lot of capital has been going towards climate mitigation, so greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but we focus on adaptation. And we are equity investors. We typically invest anywhere between 1 million and 3 million USD in companies that we call platform businesses. And these are businesses that are helping providing a bundled set of solutions to smallholder farmers. So maybe not just better inputs, but also better inputs in financing, not just market access, but maybe market access and training, for example. We are keen to invest in insurance models, online marketplaces. The bubbles there just kind of give you a sense of the areas where we are most interested in. When I say aggregator platforms, think processors. We have a tomato processing company in our portfolio, for example, as well as a dairy processing company in our portfolio. Digital platforms, again, supply chain solutions, online marketplaces, we're very keen. And then innovative financial services is another area where we are keen to invest. Next slide, please. We have the ability to invest in Kenya, Uganda, Ghana, and Nigeria. I mentioned our sweet spot as being between 1 and 3 million. We can go as low as 300,000 USD, and we can invest both equity as well as what we call quasi-equity. That's a convertible note. I think that the other important thing to mention is that as a fund, we do look to exit, and we do seek to make a profit off of our investment. Our investment holding period is usually somewhere between 5 and 7 years. And in addition to investing capital, so equity into companies, we have what's called a technical assistance facility. And this is grant capital that we make available to our portfolio companies to help them to do a myriad of things. And I think the two things to highlight is that we help them to stay on track in terms of ESG, and we help them to essentially invest in farmer training that will help smallholder farmers better adapt to climate change. So a big chunk of that technical assistance facility is going towards encouraging and reducing the friction of engaging in sustainable and climate-related activities. The last thing I think that's also worth mentioning is our impact measurement. So we measure kind of true to our acumen roots. For those of you who have heard of acumen, true to our acumen roots, we do try to measure impact. Not a lot of funds are doing that at this point, but it is kind of part of our DNA. And we do that across two ways. The first way is that we measure farmer, we'll call it farmer well-being. Are farmers better off as a result of having worked with these companies in our portfolio? Are their yields increasing? Are their incomes increasing? What challenges are they having with the companies? The other bit of impact that we measure is climate resilience. As I mentioned at the very beginning of my presentation, the core investment thesis of what we're doing is to help smallholder farmers adapt to climate change. And so what we've done is that we have, with a third party, created a survey tool where we essentially survey farmers every 12 to 18 months from each of our companies. And we are tracking them to see if they're actually adopting the practices that would make them more resilient to changes in climate. Do they have access to the tools and services that they need in order to become more resilient? So practices may be, are they intercropping, for example? Are they using better water management skills like solar irrigation or drip irrigation, for example? Do they have access to loans? Do they have access to savings? Do they have access to insurance? Those are some of the things that we're tracking that we basically bring together as a composite score. And we use that composite score to understand whether or not our farmers are actually better off as a result of as a result of the companies in our portfolio. So we have, I think it's important to realize that as we think about ESG and as we think about climate finance, we have really, with the architecture of ARAF, we have really embedded ESG and we've embedded sustainability throughout. From the end, as I talked about in terms of measuring impact, in the middle, once a company is in our portfolio, they're eligible for technical assistance around ESG and climate smart agricultural training for farmers. And then even before they become a part of our portfolio, we have a predictive screen that we use to help us to understand whether or not a company is highly, moderately, or low, or not very likely to improve climate resilience in farmers. So I think that we are just one example of many that are out there. We are really learning from the edge. It's early days. We've been around since 2019 and we made 5 investments. But we are learning daily about what works and what doesn't work. And again, just one of several examples out there of how ESG and climate can be, this rigor and this robustness can actually be built into commercially viable models.
Thanks, Rebecca, for that introduction to the Agricultural Resilient Fund. Just to kick off a conversation with you both around sustainable finance. Now, obviously, sustainable finance is an evolving, rapidly emerging, and extremely essential financing approach for development on our continent. And maybe I could start with you, Ruben. You talked about the fact that you work with the finance sector, so with banks, with insurers, with investors, to create this sustainable finance sector in itself. How influential is this sector when you look across our continent, be it from East Africa to West Africa, Southern Africa, in the grand scheme of financing? And if it's not where it should be, how is this going to change?
Thanks, Susan. I think, I think a quick answer would be, of course, very influential, the market. Also, given that, a lot of, African markets, you see, at least within the finance sector, are very bank-led. So for example, as an example, like Kenya, it's a very bank-led system. So which means, banks as financial intermediaries, the direction they actually take as an industry is going to have a very huge influence on the direction that finances actually flow. So there was one side of finding the market architecture and how the market looks like, but also I think secondly, what actually makes it important is also because of the level of development. We have quite a huge chunk of markets in Africa that are very underdeveloped. And here I'm actually even thinking of the insurance industry, for example, even across the continent, which means then if we are at that nascent stage of still, trying to define the market and say like where the insurance market is headed, then if you actually align it to sustainability or ESG, then it means the market is growing with that, component within within its structure, I would say. So yeah, I think it's important, one, because of just the nature of the system, but also two, because of the level of development of the market. I think the last thing to say on that is because we are seeing a lot of penetration of like micro products within the African market, either banking micro products, micro insurance, investment in like small groups, and very retail driven kind of product innovation, then it means we will need to see products that actually resonate with the masses. So there will be a lot of like massification of financial products going forward.
Great, thank you. I guess there's been the history that banking is niche, and the need for it to now really, or financing is niche, and the need for it to really expand in terms of solving for people to have access to capital for things that are really relevant to their livelihoods. Rebecca, thank you. If I can come to you, when we had our first event, which I mentioned that we had in August, participants highlighted in the poll questions that food security is one of the most important priority areas for sustainable financing. Is it difficult to finance the agriculture sector? And if so, how can this be resolved?
Sure. Is it difficult? I think that there is a shared belief that agriculture is critical, and there is a lot of interest in funding agriculture-related projects. So I think that at least on that point, there's a lot of alignment. I think the challenge that is often the case with agriculture is that, look, if you're an investor and you're looking for very, very high returns, quick returns like what you see in the fintech space and in other fast-growing sectors, you won't get that. If you're looking for low operating expenses, like you see with, you create one product and then you scale it across millions of people, you're not going to get that with farming or in agriculture. So your OpEx tends to be quite high. But what I will say is that, look, there are what we call values-aligned commercial investors who are keen, who recognize the importance of agriculture, who have to get a return because it's part of their mandate, but they are keen to be flexible, they are keen to take risks. And so I think At first, I would say that, yeah, it can be done. It takes a little bit longer, and the framing of the investment proposition needs to be done correctly, but it can be done. From an acumen standpoint, we had actually been doing this type of agriculture investing for the last 10 years. So we had a lot of lessons learned, some hard lessons learned, some failures. And from those failures, we were also able to say, this is what works and this is what doesn't. And so that helped to give us a much more nuanced perspective on what types of investments to make. And hopefully our perspective has de-risked some of the agriculture and sustainability work that's out there. I think the other way to think about it as well is that there is also, you know, it's still early days. It still feels like early days, really, on climate and ESG. And what we do see now more and more is that grant capital is coming in to subsidize the structuring, if you will, of ESG and climate-related work. You know, going back to another point that I think is really important to make is, as ESG and climate finance is evolving, it has to be commercially grounded. And what I mean by that is there has to be a mechanism whereby investors who it is their fiduciary responsibility to make an investment and get a return, they have to be able to generate that return. And so the way that we think about it is that ESG and climate, they are integrally related into the commercials of the business. For example, if you are a tomato processing company and the rains don't come or pestilence comes, that has a direct impact on your ability to process tomatoes and make tomato paste. Or from an ESG standpoint, if you find out that, you know, there's some pollutants that are being put into the water source, or there's some you know, some policies and procedures that are not in place around child labor and natural resource utilization, no one is going to buy your company. And for us, we want companies that are going to be high quality companies that will be built and sold at some point in the near future. So for us, it's really important that there is a connection and a very, very well articulated overlap between what makes for a good ESG and climate related business also makes for a good commercially viable, profitable business. And so more and more, I think that when you're able to tie the commercials with ESG and climate, it makes it more sustainable for everyone, for the environment, for the investor, as well as for the customers.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, you know, also the future of sustainable financing, climate financing, food security financing, etc., is a lot was going to be shaped out of, you know, like you were saying, Ruben, the COP26 conversations that are currently happening, with all the big financial institutions kind of then going to set the trend of what's going to be for the future. There's a question here that I'd like to pose to you, Rebecca. Let me just see if I can quickly find it again. Could you speak about your impact measurements when it comes to addressing the issue of capital additionality? So it's a question from one of our participants, Dominic, who says he likes the idea of acumen impact measurement. Can you speak on how your impact measure addresses the issue of capital additionality?
So I'm not 100% sure when you say capital additionality, what that means. We do track how much additional capital comes in after our capital comes in. So we call it follow-on capital. But from an additionality standpoint, we don't necessarily keep track of that. What we are keeping track of is really, it's a customer experience. As I said before, are farmers making more money? Have their yields increased? We do track something called Net Promoter Score, which is a proxy for farmer loyalty. We track things like what are the services that you would like to have provided. And then we keep track of those year over year over year to see what's working and what's not working in the business. And what we find is that farmers are very forthcoming about what they would like to see differently. And we use that as a feedback loop for the business. On the impact measurement side for climate, again, we're tracking things like, have you encountered any shocks before? Any climate climate shocks? If so, how did you deal with it? Did you have to sell assets? Did you have savings? If you needed to, secure a certain amount of money in a short period of time, could you do that? That is a proxy for a farmer's vulnerability to climate shocks. And again, we're also asking things like access to insurance, access to water-related, management mechanisms, and so on. So we're not really thinking about capital additionality in our current model for measuring impact. It really is around the farmer experience and farmer changes in behavior that our work and our technical assistance facility and our capital can make happen.
Great. Thanks for that. Ruben, from your perspective, what would happen to growth and development in Africa, so on our continent, if we continue with traditional financing like it's always been versus moving to sustainable financing?
I think on that, I don't think the question is like, what will happen? I don't think we have that luxury. Given a lot of investment globally is actually, getting aligned to ESG. And if you think of the investment landscape, of course, you have the investors, and then you have the finance players. If you think of asset managers, and then you have society. There's increasing a lot of pressure from society for investors to actually decarbonize their portfolios. We've seen a lot of even strikes, and we have green movements, and there's a lot of reputational risk. I mean, right now, for example, if you actually want to underwrite a new oil pipeline, as the insurer or reinsurer, actually, you have to be very careful how you deal with the reputational dynamics of that. And we are seeing all the big players like the BlackRocks, and for example, the Net Zero Banking Alliance, we have even global, like the Morgans and the Goldman Sachs. They're already thinking of what net zero is going to mean for them and the alignment. So I don't think there's that luxury from the investment side, and also from society and the pressure that comes with it. I think the bigger question is, what is it that we need to do in order to have the opportunity or not the luxury to transform to more sustainable models. So as a friend says, money flows in three directions. One is solvable problems or seemingly solvable problems. And PEs and VCs are very familiar with this. Money also flows where there's capacity, absorption capacity, to be deployed. And here we're talking about skill set, investment skill set, being able to identify opportunity and all that. And money flows through relationships. So then the question is, how do we help, like in the audience, how are you thinking around building your own internal capacity to attract, say, sustainable finance? I mean, there's going to be a lot of pledges today. Yesterday, there were pledges on deforestation, pledges on renewable energy coming from all quarters, from the Rockefellers and the IKEAs and, all this. The question is, how do you actually build your capacity internally to be able to attract this kind of funding? And two, how do you actually show that you have a business case for a solvable problem? And of course, relationship mostly comes through the network, right? You need to know where the opportunities are. You need to have your ear on the ground, and that kind of thing. So I think I think so. The question of whether we actually align is, I think that's settled. The question is actually, how do you actually do it? And of course, this is going to mean some very serious talent in the investment scene on analyzing green or sustainability projects.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both very much. I want to transition, actually, because I think this is a good point, a good space to our next session, where we will be working or speaking with 4 entrepreneurs. And I think that's the point you were alluding to, Ruben, and you also mentioned, Rebecca, that the businesses also have to be ready and in a certain ability or capacity to be able to take this sort of funding and to be aligned to be it climate or social impact. So before I let you leave, if I could please ask, there are a couple of questions that are coming through from Margaret, from Roman, and I think there was another one for you, Rebecca, from Chitundu. If I could please ask you to respond to them in the chat. They're each asking you specifically about, be it your fund, Rebecca and yourself, Ruben, there's some questions around risk, investment, and also more specifically around UNEP and Kenya Bankers Association. So thank you so much. I will leave you with that very kind task that you have agreed to do, which then allows me to just move on to the next session. So thanks very much. And now let me invite our next guest for the next panel. We're moving gear now because we've heard from the people who give money. Now we want to hear from the people who receive the money, the clients, the businesses, the borrowers, the entrepreneurs themselves. And for this session, we're going to have 4 African SMEs and their business leaders joining us for this session. So I'd like to welcome on screen to join us Ifi Umuna, who's the co-founder and co-CEO of Nourishing Africa, based out of Nigeria. Gilfin Nyangasi, who's the Assistant Director at Solibrium Kenya. Navalayo Osembo Ombati, who's the co-founder and CEO of Enda Athletic here in Kenya. And also John Nyangwecha, who's the CEO of Aqua Clara Kenya. Thank you for you all being here with us. Now, a lot of our audience may not be aware about what your organizations do, so I thought this might be a good place for us at least to start off. And if it's all right, Ifi, are you happy to go first?
Yes, I am.
Great. Great, great. All right, my colleague Abu will bring up your slides and you can just tell us briefly about Nourishing Africa and what you do.
Wonderful. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Ifi Umuna. I am the co-CEO and co-founder of Nourishing Africa. And we can go straight to the next slide and I will give a brief overview of Nourishing Africa. So Nourishing Africa was incubated by Sahel Consulting, which is a management consultancy firm which strictly works within the agriculture and food space across sub-Saharan Africa. And through this work, the managing partner and co-founder of Sahel Consulting, Ndidi Ununeli, in collaboration with Sahel Consulting, quickly assessed and found out that regardless of where we went across the continent, entrepreneurs, regardless of where they are on the spectrum, from farm to fork, struggled to scale when it came to growing their businesses and ensuring that they were able to maximize their efficiency. This might be due to lack of funding or access to market. They really struggled when it came to hiring talent, and the list really goes on. And through that, we quickly realized that entrepreneurs often find it very difficult to access a lot of the information that we within the private sector often have easy access to, particularly when it comes to data. Next slide, please. And as a result, we built Nourishing Africa. And Nourishing Africa is a knowledge and membership platform aimed at helping agri-food entrepreneurs scale from farm to fork. And for us, our mission is really to have a thriving ecosystem of support for agri-food entrepreneurs by empowering, attracting, connecting, equipping, and celebrating young agri-food entrepreneurs. And everything we do is really with the vision of seeing ourselves being food secure as a continent and net exporters of food to the world by 2050, because we see no reason why Africa should not be the breadbasket of the world. Next slide, please. And as such, through this, we have 3 main functions, including a membership portal where we provide ecosystem support to a range of agri-food entrepreneurs, including from 37 countries currently. We also have a range of knowledge and capacity building, really aimed at helping them beef up their skills, their staff skills in order for them to grow, as well as implement support programs, including that of the Entrepreneur Support Program, which is in partnership with the MasterCard Foundation and USADF. And when thinking about financing in particular, what we've seen through Nourishing Africa is that for us, when we were in the process of seeking finance, in terms of how to scale Nourishing Africa from a project in a consultancy firm to an independent organization, we quickly realized that there were a few organizations that we could discuss or talk to. By organizations, I mean investors, grantees, and so forth. Mainly because we were directly working with agriculture and food, and we were a business development support organization, both of which are often seen as very shaky in terms of investing time and effort and resources into. And luckily, through the MasterCard Foundation, we were provided working grants for both this project, Nourishing Africa as a Whole, which then became an independent organization, as well as the next slide, please, which is the Entrepreneur Support Program, which is also in partnership with the United States Africa Development Foundation. In addition to this, what we've seen across our members when it comes to financing is that we engage with a range of investors as well as entrepreneurs. And when we engage with investors as to try and see how we can link some of our SMEs to the investors, the biggest issue is the ticket size. And in closing, I'd want to really urge the investors on this call to really reassess how we look at ticket sizes and transaction sizes, because this is something that is really hindering the growth of SMEs within the agriculture and food space. The ticket sizes are way too high, and it really destabilizes and stifles the growth of these SMEs. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ife. Before we move on to the next speaker, I just want to let you guys know that we're going to run again a poll survey, which we're going to post up shortly for you. So please do give us your feedback. This is really going to be helpful in terms of how we shape the next steps between Africa Venture Philanthropy Alliance and different stakeholders and partners on what we need to do to drive this agenda forward for our continent. The poll is up for you. Please feel free to respond. I'll now like to invite our next entrepreneur, who is Gilfin Nyangasi, the Assistant Director of Celebrium. Gilfin, if you could just quickly introduce your organization to us, that would be really great. Thank you. Abu, if you could bring up Gilfin's slides, please.
Thank you. So my name is Gilfin Nyangasi. I work with Celebrium Solar that is based in Kenya, specifically in Kakamega, that is Western Kenya. And what we do is that we distribute solar home systems for home use and businesses and other institutions like hospitals. And we began our operations right from the year 2017. And so we've been in business for the past 5 years. And looking at the journey, it has really been an interesting journey for us. Quick grasp for us is that when we began our business, we really didn't know much about how the solar market is working, but we had clearly identified a need for rural communities to access affordable and clean energy. This is a result of our initial trading, whereby we used to do energy efficient cookstoves, and we realized most of the houses had a lot of issues around using kerosene lamps, using these local or rather unsustainable methods of lighting. And so that's how we came up to introduce solar for mostly first for our local community networks. And then later on, we have been able to expand to over 15 counties in Kenya. One of the things I must mention is that the solar systems that we provide are embedded on the pay-as-you-go platform, whereby clients are able to pay a small deposit, and then the rest of the money is spread across a period between 8 to 26 months. Looking at that kind of model, and of course, as a demand for the solar systems, then it lands many organizations into a financing gap. And so this caught us actually thinking on how best to move along financing. one of the quick steps we were able to do is to access the right kind of advice. And of course, this came through our B Corp certification in the year 2018. And I will be able to share more about the certification, but this is where we were able to really look at the impact side and also be able to balance our workers, the communities we work with, and environment. This was a key thing for us because it really helped us to develop some internal that have really encouraged. Next slide, please. Good. So our mission as Solibrium is to provide access to affordable and reliable off-grid solar energy, mostly to the underserved communities. You realize that we have some people who ideally have they don't have a lot of disposable income, and so this was our key focus. And our main vision is to ensure that at least every household where we operate is lit. Most of these people, they live in the rural communities, and so, or rather the places where they have challenges of accessing electricity. And also you find that we have a lot of issues surrounding access to energy. We have issues of affordability, getting durable products, and of course, also the knowledge around how to take care of these products. And so Solibrium has been developing capacity over the years to ensure that we can address this, even as we continue trading in the competitive market. So currently, I must say that our funding history journey has been a success. We must say that we are into a success journey, whereby we've been able to access financing through COSAP funding, which is basically a partnership between the government of Kenya and the World Bank and SMB. And one of the key things that really stood out that helped us to be able to implement this project is through having a legal incorporated company, having products that have been well certified, and also having internal capacity to really handle the funds and operations. Key things and policies that we had to put in place is issues to do with the gender and youth policy, non-discrimination, and also a keen eye on environmental concerns. The milestones that we've been able to make so far is that at least we have a staff body of over 30 people that are fully employed. We have a large network of over 500 local community members who act as our sales agents. And of course, a big percentage is women and youth, which is one of the key things that we were to accomplish through this funding. One of the things that I must put across for, last slide, please, for most of the SMEs pursuing financing, next slide, is that there's no end journey to pursuing finances because finances are never enough. So I would say, let's pursue while building internal capacity to handle. Thank you.
Sorry, thanks a lot for that, Gilfin, and especially for the insights that you gave on the last slide regarding the financing. I'd like to ask Navalayo or Nava to please just introduce Enda for us as quickly as you can so we can eagerly get into talking to you about sustainable finance from an SME perspective.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan. Hi, everyone. So Enda is a company, we are based in Kenya, but we do have markets in Europe and the US, and we work with Kenyan athletes to make running shoes for runners around the world. So in terms of what our fundraising journey has been, we've kind of gone through different things. So first we started with our savings. So we are two co-founders, and so we started from savings and went to friends and family, then we went crowdfunding, angel investors, and then we went to VC funding. And so we've kind of gone through the whole spectrum, and this is to give you insight from a perspective of where it is in terms of if you're investing in Africa. So I'd say if for people, it's really difficult to start from a savings perspective because it's dependent on income, and also because there's so much risk in terms of the business landscape. And so from an entrepreneur perspective, I always say, you plan for double the risk. So if you think you're going to face 10 risks, plan for 20 risks. If you think you're going to take 6 months, plan for like a year. Unfortunately, a lot of people do not have access to savings, so it's very limiting because it's usually the first point of getting started. Why didn't we go to banks? Because of this very issue. Like when you're a startup, you don't really have any physical assets to show the financial other than your dream, and of course you also don't have the cash flow to kind of like support it. And so savings is usually where most entrepreneurs start, but it's also an obstacle by itself because it requires some level of privilege to be able to have enough to maybe not be remunerated for a year or so as you build your business. The other thing, on our second journey, we basically invited friends and family to invest. One of it was one of the things that I think was successful for us to convince them to bring them on board is that we definitely viewed them as investors, not as friends and families. So we did a formal prospectus, we did a formal presentation. It was very formal, and I think that really helped in delineating us as individuals and them also as individuals, and they were able to see the business as it was. But either way, I would say we had like a 7% success rate with friends and family. And that was also just because some people have money, some don't, and some find it hard to believe in a dream that doesn't really have any traction on the ground. So that was our lesson from friends and family. But the ones who did come on board have been with us from the beginning, and I'd say enjoying the benefits of being investors. But this is also the next reality for entrepreneurs, especially on the continent, in terms of tapping into people, especially if you don't have sufficient savings. And then we went to crowdfunding. Crowdfunding again was as a result of not having access to the things required by financial institutions. Mostly they were asking for collateral, and we had to be creative and find a way to make money. And so we decided to go through crowdfunding. We did 2 crowdfunding campaigns. The first one, we got $140,000. That was essentially the seed that savings, family, and friends took us to prototype. Then crowdfunding essentially took us from prototype to scale. And it wasn't really that much scale, but enough to basically show validation. I think the frustration, I would say, from a fundraising perspective at this particular point of crowdfunding was not having clear feedback from investors. Everybody was like, get to the prototype, get to the show market validation, and it always felt like the goalpost was being moved. So I think my message to investors is just no is fine, just kind of like be clear, because it just makes life easier for the entrepreneurs. And then the good thing with the crowdfunding is that once we were able to show the market validation to show that there was a business case, we were then able to get angel investors. Realistically speaking, getting angel investors on the continent has been one of the most difficult things. I think there are various reasons for that. One is that money is not that much available, and also it's just people really prefer to deal with hard assets. And so our experience from angels was that more of it works more if you have recommendations as opposed to just doing cold calls. And last but not least, I'd say all this prepared us for VC funding because we've been able to create the business, build it, show traction, and eventually that's where we are right now. In terms of what winning looks like from a perspective of investment, that's the next slide. I would say one of the things we've learned is that there has to be investor-investee alignment. That means, what vision do you have? What vision do we have? Are we aligned in terms of that vision? Very, very clear. And then, of course, a written agreement or clarification of expectations. Most investors will ask for this, either through a term sheet or something like that. But it's always better to have this upfront before the discussions so that people know what the other is expecting. And last but not least, money is not everything. Right now, if I'm looking at investors, it's more of what value addition are you adding to the business other than just the money. Yeah, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Navalayo. So when we're listening to each of these presentations, you can see that our businesses or the SMEs, the entrepreneurs, are setting the scene for you of, yes, what their business is about, but also importantly, how they went about securing the funding they received and the key insights from that. Now we'll move to the next company, and I would like to invite John Nyangwecha, who's the CEO of Aqua Clara. Abu, my colleague, will bring up the slides for you, and we can hear about your organization and journey.
All right, thank you, Susan. So as Susan has mentioned, my name is John Nyangwecha. I am the CEO of a social enterprise called Aqua Clara Kenya, which is based, as the name says, in Kenya, working mostly in Western Kenya, but with operations across Uganda and Tanzania as well. So you can move to the next slide. So we were founded in 2009, similar to Solibrium, and although Nava didn't mention this, similar to ENDA as well, we are a B Corp certified company, which already aligns us with a lot of the things we've been talking about regarding sustainability. So the B Corp certification process really is looking at how we operate as a business in relation to the environment, to the community, to the employees, and a lot of those ESG metrics that are important are already contained within the assessment process that we go through to become a B Corp certified organization. The space that we really occupy is within the water, sanitation, and hygiene sector. I think all of us can appreciate the need to have safe water and proper sanitation for everyone. But unfortunately, the reality today is that there are millions of people across the world, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, in countries like Kenya, for whom this is a big challenge. And so as a company, we design and distribute solutions to solve this problem. We have, over the last 10 years or so, enabled more than 300,000 people to have access to sustainable, safe drinking water through the products that we have. Like what you can see on the screen there, which is one of our water filters. Next slide, please. The one thing that I wanted to talk about is carbon credit financing, which is one of the revenue streams we have as a company. So besides selling products and besides some of the money we've been able to secure through grants and debt financing, around the year 2014, we started exploring the possibility of getting carbon credits financing. And this carbon credits financing is premised on the fact that the people who buy our products, especially the water filters, are going to use these water filters to make their water safe. Now, if they didn't have these water filters, the practice would be that they would need to boil water. And the process of boiling water is going to emit carbon dioxide, which, as we know, is a greenhouse gas. And if this carbon dioxide that is prevented by people using our water filters can be measured, we can then trade that in the carbon credits market. Because there are companies that are emitting carbon dioxide to an extent that is beyond the limits that have either been set for compliance purposes, or companies that voluntarily want to set certain targets on their footprint. And so with the water filters that we sell, we are able to reduce the carbon dioxide emission from the people who would ordinarily be boiling water. That is then quantified and has become a major revenue stream for our company. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so in a nutshell, just to summarize that, I think the big opportunity here is to look at the climate change attention that is speaking. We talked about COP26 that is happening now. Hopefully the outcome of that is that there is more concerted effort to address climate change. And with that happening, you're going to see more companies being very conscious of their carbon footprint. And that hopefully then creates demand within the carbon credits market for credits. And these credits then are going to come to companies like Aqua Clara that are working within communities to address, of course, for us primarily, access to safe drinking water, but doing that in a way that is reducing the carbon dioxide emissions. And so if we're able to convert that into financing, which for us has become, like I said, a major revenue stream, that then enables that beyond just reducing carbon dioxide emission, we are actually directly addressing another important SDG, which is access to safe drinking water. Some of the challenges here include, of course, the fact that the market depends on demand and supply, and so we'll have to keep an eye on how that behaves over time. There is a reality in operating, I think Ruben talked about this in his presentation, in communities where logistics are not easy, the infrastructure is not well developed. And so the cost of reaching customers, the cost of doing business is a real challenge. And so that's one of the things that we have to keep an eye on, and hopefully as more investment goes into infrastructure, that becomes easier and easier. But in a nutshell, really the impact for us is to look at reducing carbon dioxide emission and at the same time, increasing access to safe drinking water. And that is possible because of this opportunity to get carbon credits financing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to all of you for setting the scene, one, importantly, on what your organization is about, but more so how you went about and your case study and journey around the funding and sustainable financing you were able to receive. I want to go a little bit deeper with you to ask some questions related to sustainable finance and to you as SMEs and how this landscape is really shaping out. And Navalayo, maybe I could start with you. As an SME, what does sustainable finance actually mean from your perspective of a small, medium-sized enterprise?
I'd say there's various elements. The first is basically from a perspective of the sustainable finance, basically that even the finance is funding a sustainable business, right? So for example, from the investor perspective, that it is looking at a business that has a likelihood of being a going concern. That's number one. And then the second perspective is that it is also a business that is adding to the sustainability agenda, and not just adding it from a buzzword perspective, but actually living the mission and the vision, like businesses that are going to that are adding to the sustainability agenda. Because as we all know, we don't really have a plan B Earth. This is the Earth that we have, and so even from an investment perspective, we need to start looking at businesses that are kind of like geared towards that perspective. And last but not least, I'd say from an African perspective, it's also looking at industries that are opening up opportunities for income earning, because I do think that sustainability in one part of the world is quote unquote a luxury, and in another world it's not. Because, for example, if I have only firewood to boil my water, it doesn't matter how much you want me to be sustainable, like that's just what I have. And so I do believe like having a proper job and having access to income and having that agency to make sustainable decision is actually a very key part of that. And so we need to invest more in businesses that are creating jobs and giving people that chance to be able to have a choice on what's sustainable.
Great. Thanks, Nawa, for that feedback. Iffy, you were the first one to speak. It seems like it was a little while ago, but I wanted to just come back to you. When it comes to sustainable finance or financing in general, what advice would you give to SME businesses or SME CEOs in terms of financing and securing that financing?
I think for us, what we've seen is that the first things SMEs or agribusiness owners, agripreneurs go to or think of is banks and loans. And that's one thing that we deter against. We try and ensure that they don't do. And there are many ways of receiving financing, ranging from grants to patient capital, angel investors. I think from an SME point of view, the first thing is to really assess where you stand, what you want. One of entrepreneurs said, not all money is good money. You need to know what you can handle and what you cannot handle, what you can promise and what won't work, regardless of if you move, mountains. And I think that's the first step. Thereafter, you then do your research. You always need to know what each funder, each investor has priority areas. If you do not fit within, if it doesn't align with your vision and your mission, I suggest you try somewhere else. There will be someone somewhere that understands your business and is willing to see your business grow the way you want it to grow. And that would be my advice.
Thanks for that. Nava, there's a question there from Chitundu directly to Enda. Maybe I could ask you to respond to it in the chat. While I take this other question to John, you talked about the B Corp framework, yeah, which served for you as a business in terms of preparing you to be able to meet ESG criteria. What advice do you give to SME businesses, and what was the value of this type of framework for you in making you investor ready?
Great question. I think I'll start off by saying the whole premise of the B Corp movement is to have businesses act as a force for good. I think it used to be enough for companies to aspire for profits. I think that phase has changed. It's become increasingly important for companies to look at beyond just the bottom line of profits and start looking at other considerations that we've been talking about that are very important. And it's not just for financing. I think it's important for the company being able to operate, of course, within an environment that is conducive. That includes, of course, the physical environment, but even the communities that we are part of. And so the B Corp movement, in a nutshell, I think, and looking at even the assessment that a company has to go through, really helps shed a light on the very important aspects that a company should be paying attention to. So not just the profits, you're looking at how you're treating your employees. Because believe it or not, it is possible to just build a company and look at the bottom line without asking yourself, are the employees that are part of this movement taken care of? Is the environment and our conduct with even the suppliers, so not just what we do to our environment, but the suppliers that give us the materials we use, are they also valuing the same things that we value? And so my advice, I think, based on the B Corp assessment, which I would recommend for anybody who has an SME to go through, I think it really helps you identify the opportunities that exist to strengthen the setup and the structures within your organization, which ultimately then are important, of course, for attracting the financing that is important. But I think even beyond that, building a great company that acts as a force for good within the community that you're part of.
Yeah, true. Gilfin, I think for me, that kind of bridges very well to the question that I wanted to ask you, which is one of the biggest challenges in financing and sustainable financing in general is governance. Now, everyone complains about governance and the struggles you have. Your organization is not even based in the capital city. It's, based in one of the counties. From your perspective, how do you handle governance as an SME to really make sure that your business doesn't stumble or fall down? You're on mute. Go ahead. Just unmute yourself. Thanks.
That's a big question. But for me, from where we stand, I think it's first doing the right things. When it comes to
Gilfin, it's a little hard to hear you. Maybe you could add a bit more volume on your side.
Great. Can you hear me?
I can now.
Great. So when it comes to governance, like for us, what we've been able to do is to ensure that every part of our team takes part in the running of the business, so that their thoughts and how they work are taken care of. Another thing is to do staff development so that people are competent in what they do. And of course, lastly, what we've been able to do is assessing our structure and ownership, whereby we allow some staff to really rise to the top and become and become top playing employees, because with this, we are able to improve competence from top to bottom.
Oh, sorry, Gilfin. I think the audio on your side is quite low. Margaret's just posted that she can't hear you too clearly as well. So I think our audience may be struggling. What I could do, can you just try it again for us? Just say hi, we see if we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
It's actually still the same. What I can do as we try and figure out what the problem might be is maybe come back to one of our other panelists, and then I'll come back to you with another question. So yeah, let me see. Iffy, from your side, what advice would you give to providers of capital when they're deploying sustainable finance, especially to, you know, as a borrower, as a client, as an SME? What advice would you give them when they want to deploy capital?
I think it's important to know the terrain you're working in. I love the idea that those who are providing capital are set up in Africa and are getting to understand how the agriculture and food space, which is the space I work in, and works. It is very different from other regions. It's nuanced in many ways. And I think the first step would be to really understand the lay of the land, how the business operates, what the risks are, the nuanced risks as well, excuse me. And I think the only advice I would give is to work with the partners as opposed to a dynamic which the SMEs are either, you know, afraid or worried about stating certain factors that might contribute to the success of the partnership. It's really important to have a sound relationship where they can relay their fears, issues within the planting season or whatever part of the value chain they may be in, and have mitigation strategies. Nothing is sure, particularly in this sector, and it's really important to have backup plans, both from the SME point of view and from the investor point of view.
Thank you for that. Gilfin, can I just check if we might have you back? You're on mute. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
It's a little bit better, but it's still quite faint. I'm not sure if you might have a mic close by. The joys of technology in our evolving and emerging continent.
Yeah, what about now?
This is better. This is better. If the audience can't hear her, please just post quickly in the chat so I know. But otherwise, Gilfin, go ahead and let us know about the governance and how you're making, you know, what advice you would give and what you've done to strengthen the governance for your business.
So one of the things we've done as a business is to involve all our teams when it comes to running of the business, so that all staff are able to understand what's going on. When we have fundraising, when we have new operations coming in, new dimensions, we're able to bring them on board so that people are not left behind thinking what happened. Yeah. So that is one of the things that happens. Number two is building capacity for our teams, whereby we do our best to capacity build people in their areas of work to improve on efficiency and competence. So yeah, that's what we've done. And lastly, what we've always tried to do is to embrace the issues of gender across all our working sections, so that you're also able to have women really sitting in more decision-making panels, and that really helps us to really move in the right direction. So those are part of the things that we have been able to do. But of course, it was not in a one-day thing. It's something that we've been able also to learn. And also it was a call that also came through our policy, through implementing various policies that we have in terms of around governance. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot from that. And I'm glad we could hear you just a little bit better. So we hope it will get better as we're closing out. John, if I could come to you, from your perspective, what advice would you give to providers of capital when they're actually deploying sustainable finance?
That's a tough one.
What would you tell the money people? What advice would you want to give them as money people?
Oh, they should give us the money. Yeah, it would be good if some of it came our way. But I think the most important thing is probably rehashing what we've already said. There is a movement now of very many good SMEs and companies that want to do well. And unfortunately, of course, these companies may not be easy to find. But I think engaging that ecosystem as companies come up and being part of it, rather than waiting for companies to emerge and meet all these considerations that the investors are looking at. I think it would be good for the investors to dip their feet in the pool and work with entrepreneurs as they set up these companies. For us as entrepreneurs to also understand what are investors looking for, and for investors now to look at that sustainable financing as one of the things that they can inculcate within that ecosystem. And I think it can work to an extent where if entrepreneurs know that investors value sustainability, as people set up companies, they will have no option but to set up with that particular mindset and with that particular structure in place. So I think investors can play a very pivotal role in moving this conversation to that level where they engage entrepreneurs directly, and entrepreneurs then can interpret that to mean that this is really what it takes to get investment, because as an entrepreneur, I'll do what it takes to get the investment. And if that's what it takes, then that's what I'll do.
Great, thank you for that. I think it also highlights what Ruben was saying to us so much earlier about, there's really a niche for the private equity and the venture capitalists in terms of how they work in providing new, financing channels, innovative financing, but also importantly for traditional finance sector, the banks, to start seeing things in a different way because the landscape has to shift, where it can be, as Ruben at the time said, more for the masses, more for what we need to solve for together. John, just on this question before maybe I close out with Nava, what was the benefit for you in accessing sustainable finance versus traditional finance?
Well, great question again. I think specifically for the financing option that I talked about, which is carbon credits, I think what was very beneficial was that we got to actually improve on the things that we were doing. And I'll be very specific here. For us to access this type of financing, we had to make sure that we track every single customer. So every single customer that buys a product from us has to be very well tracked. We have to do 100% follow-up to make sure that they understand how to use this technology and they're using it, which ultimately is very beneficial to the customer. It means that the customer gets a very good after-sale service, which ultimately helps us achieve the impact that we are after, which is access to safe drinking water. If we had a different type of financing, we would still, of course, be able to sell the products that we sell, but I don't think it would work the same way that we would have that level of incentivization, financial incentivization to care beyond the sale. Because typically once you make a sale, that should be it. But in our case, that after-sale service is financially incentivized. And so the biggest benefit I would say from this type of financing for us specifically was that as an impact-oriented organization, it really helped us to keep our eyes on what really matters, which is not selling products, but access to safe drinking water, because those can be two different things. And in our case, I'm very happy that they are not. When we sell our product, we actually ensure that people are using it, and we are then ensuring that people have access to safe water, which ultimately means that people are healthier.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. Guys, please remember that we have our poll still open for you. If you haven't had the chance to respond, please do so. We would really love to have your feedback. Nava, let me close out this conversation here on this panel with you before I hand over to Nancy. You showed us a really great slide of the many loopholes and journeys of your funding journey. So from your own experience and from your perspective, what's the advice that you would give to providers of capital when deploying this financing to organizations or to SMEs like yourselves? What advice would you give them?
I'd say, first, just kind of like understanding the language difference. And it's not like from a Kiswahili English perspective, it's more of when you're talking about financial language. So for example, when you are looking for investments is when you are learning about cap tables, you are learning about, convertible debt, term sheets, and things like that. And one thing I've noticed about entrepreneurs with really good businesses, some of them have really no idea what all that means. And so I think kind of sometimes coming in without assumptions of what do people understand, or even now that you're talking about sustainable financing, people have the idea, they just might call it a different name, or they have a different understanding of it. And so I've seen really great businesses miss out on funding, or because I feel like the language between the funder, the investor and the investee was not common. The investee was like, why are they asking me that? And the funder was like, why don't you know that? And so I'd say just kind of removing any assumptions and noting that the understanding is the same, but the expression is very different. And that you might miss out on really great businesses if you don't kind of like factor in. So I hope people take time to understand where the SMEs are, and possibly to also see how to steer that sustainability conversation. It could be that in my business, I'm not able to see it, but through conversations, I can be able to be like, oh yeah, I didn't know like that's an element of the business. So just not having assumptions and really going in to understand where everybody's coming from.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much to all our panelists. I think that's a great moment for us to bridge to Nancy on closing us out. As I leave you with a quick thought that, it's really about cooperation, collaboration, and how we can move this agenda forward in terms of financing that really helps us to drive this continent's development in the way that we need. Nancy, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow, we've heard from such wonderful speakers today, a lot of things to think about. And I like Navaleo's point at the end about language and definitions. And in fact, I think maybe it was my mistake. I should have started off by telling everybody what the AVPA definition is for as far as sustainable financing. And we prescribe to the European Union's definition that says sustainable finance refers to the process of taking environmental, social, and governance considerations into account when making investment decisions in the financial sector, leading to more long-term investments in sustainable economic activities and projects. It's a very broad definition, but it's one that we ascribe to. And maybe for those of you who I had not introduced myself at the beginning, my name is Nancy Cairo. I am with AVPA as the director for East Africa. And I'm going to put in the chat box my email address and our CEO's email address, Dr. Frank Aswani. He had to leave for another meeting. But I just want to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you, especially our esteemed speakers today, who have given us a lot to think about. I'd like to also thank Susan for her wonderful moderating today, and all those behind the scenes who've helped us pull this event together. Last but not least, there's a slide up right now which shows all of our major donors and supporters. I'd like to thank all of them and especially call out our donors, USADF, Ford Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation. They've been three of our biggest supporters since we started 3 years ago. So we thank them for helping us get this far. This is the second dialogue dialogue session that we are having on sustainable financing. And as you can all hear, obviously this is a huge topic, even being discussed today at COP26. I think there are over 100 world leaders at that conference. So this is a subject that's not going away. As John mentioned, it is business as usual. Anybody looking for funding today or deploying funding has to think about sustainable financing. What I'd love to ask before I sign off is for anybody who, if you have some thoughts, some ideas about other topics that you'd like us to cover during our webinars. We hope to start having webinars on a monthly basis around any topic that you feel is important to the sector. Please reach out to either myself or Frank. Like I said, I've put our email addresses in the chat, and let us know what you'd like to hear more about, who you'd like us to invite to these sessions, what you'd like to discuss. On that note, thank you so much to all the participants today. It's been a wonderful session. Thank you for being on time, and thank you for being patient with us. We started a bit late, but thank you so much. Goodbye and keep safe. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.